Welcome back to Season 2 of the Spiritable podcast. My name is Luke.
I'm Richard. I'm getting a master's in divinity. On this show, we try to bring spiritual ideas down to earth.
We're all trying to be better people and grow, so get on board.
Hello, and welcome to the Spiritual
Oh, you got that. You got that.
It's a bad start. All right, we're trying that again. Hello, and welcome to the Spiritable podcast. I'm Richard.
My name is Luke, and our guest today is Christopher Heuertz. His personal website is chrisheuertz.com, and his activism/consultation page is gravitycenter.com, which is a center for contemplative activism. So, Chris, when I was doing some research into you, I was looking through a couple interviews and some of your speeches, and I heard that you were not really satisfied with your bio. So I went a little hard and wrote you up a new bio. I was hoping to hit you with it, get your feedback, see if you want to use it. How's that sound?
Awesome. Let's get at it.
All right, here we go. Mike's closer. From his origins in Omaha, Nebraska, to Kentucky for college, to India and beyond, Chris and his wife have traveled to over 70 countries over the last 20 years, serving with the Word Made Flesh organization and the New Friar movement, with the express goal of living the life of Jesus and planting new communities in the desperate corners of the global fringe. Beyond working with human trafficking victims and helping to create South Asia's first pediatric AIDS care home, Chris and his wife also started Gravity, a center for contemplative activism, which offers programs and retreats to support reflective spiritual practice for those who care about their spirituality and want to make the world a better place through challenging the social justice perils of today. He studied under Richard Rohr and Mother Teresa, has been featured in publications like Christianity Today, Relevant Magazine, The Washington Post's On Faith section, and in too many podcasts to accurately count. If that wasn't enough, Chris is also a trained minister, dislikes most condiments, and has a gnarly goatee. But above all, might be most widely known for his expertise on the Enneagram, an ancient self-discovery system used by believers and non-believers alike to delve into the darkest depths of who they are, what they fear, and how they can heal. There you go, Chris. Did I do you justice?
Awesome. Good job, man.
Nice. So cool. It was fun for me. One of my favorite classes in college was creative nonfiction, where it was just like making good stories out of truth. So I always have fun doing that. So anyway, thank you so much for joining us. We're going to focus today on Enneagrams, how they relate to spirituality, and also talk about your spiritual path a little bit.
But before we get into those, we like
sir.
to start our show with some spiritual icebreakers. Just a couple questions off the bat, hit you with to get kind of the juices flowing a little bit. So the first question, one of our favorites to ask, is
Classic.
what would you say your best or worst spiritual experience was?
All of them. I think my best experiences are the ones that I'm the most present to. And I think the ones that are the most human or mundane or ordinary that sort of catch you off guard. And so I think we got this dog a few years ago, and I feel like, man, that, Basil has no idea what's going on with this pandemic. He doesn't sort of understand, I think, how the world's changed so quickly in real time. All he cares about is the present, being with us, what he's going to eat, where he's going to chase rabbits, when he can rest. And I think there's something deeply spiritual in the returning to the present, and seeing it in him. So I say most of my best spiritual moments lately have been on walks with this guy, or just seeing him relax.
I think it's good to try to get out of yourself and your own mind a little bit through a source like that. I've also heard celebrities talking about their kids, and like their kids don't care how much money they made on the last movie or what they have going on. They just want like mom or dad to be around, just like a dog needs its owner to be present with it. I think it's a good way of grounding
like a
us.
dog.
Kids are like pets. Following that up, another sort of question is when do you personally feel most connected to God? Is it in those little moments of walking your dog? Is there like I know nature people connect to God through, or helping someone? I feel like it's always cool to see how people actively feel connected to the Lord.
Yeah, that's another good question. I don't image the divine as kind of a person with a name or a title or a metaphor, as much as I understand this to be the source of love and what love looks like and feels like, and how it it's expressed in the world. So I would generally say my most divine moments are sitting at the table with friends. And I think that's, that's echoed in most of the world religions' sacred texts, that almost every metaphor for paradise is a banquet. It's a meal. And I think when we sit at the table, we're doing something that's very and deeply spiritual.
That's cool. That's a good reminder, because my meal times are so boring these days. I cook all my meals on Sunday, and then I just eat them out of like a Tupperware container for like the whole week.
Last night I ate while playing video games. And Sonia,
that sounds par for the course.
Yeah, which like I could have stopped playing and actually like had a meal with my wife, but I didn't. So that is also a good reminder.
Sick story,
for me.
Richard.
Hey, it was relevant and connectable, relatable. All right, well, final spiritual icebreakers to take it a little more lighthearted. And this is a very important question. Boxers or briefs?
Boxers.
Really?
Oh,
See, I'm boxers to sleep, boxer briefs in the daytime. That's. I'm a big MeUndies fan. Does MeUndies make boxers?
We're trying to get MeUndies.
We're trying to get a
sponsor
MeUndies sponsorship. It's really the undertone of this whole thing. If you're listening, MeUndies out there.
There it is.
So as we dive into the deeper end of things, I know you've probably been asked it 1,000 times, but it's more fun for our listeners to hear it from your mouth than ours. If you just want to give a brief definition of what the Enneagram is and where it came from. I don't need you to go through every type, because that gets kind of long, but if you want to give a brief overview in the history, that'd be awesome.
Sure. So I love the history. Actually, I get super nerdy about this. And the bummer is I probably have, from my last 2 Enneagram books, 10 to 15,000 words of like super esoteric, wild history sort of that was cut. I mean, going all the way back to Plato, describing 9 types of people, and this maybe sort of showing the energies of what the personality system has become. The trick is with the history of the Enneagram, there's a ton of confusion around it because people think it's an ancient personality system when it's actually a modern personality system on top of an ancient process system. So, the Enneagram as a process teaching might be 5,000 years old. And, there's rumors of this in ancient Egypt and prehistoric Korea, with the early Greek mathematicians, with all the mystical streams of the world's great religions, Buddhism, Judaism, Christianity, Islam. The Sufis sort of have laid claim to versions of this. But it wasn't until 49 years ago that a Chilean Gestalt psychoanalyst began to trick out personality archetypes through this process teaching. So when people say the Enneagram is an ancient personality system, they're getting it a little wrong, because, like I said, the personality structure, if you're born in 1971 or earlier, you're older than the personality system. But it's wild. It's wild to see what's happened in 50 years and 49 years with this thing sort of unfolding.
That is really interesting. I remember reading that in my research, how it's been around for thousands of years, but only in the last like 60 or 40 or so has really been used in a modern way. So what would you say separates it from the other personality types? I'm sorry if that's been a question that's asked a ton before, but I think it's a healthy distinction to make.
Sure. I think there's a variety or a battery of personality or assessment tools out there that describe aspects or fragments of our identity and how they present in the world, or how we relate to environments, or how we show up, maybe based on socialization through birth order, or whatever this might be. Mm-hmm. I think what's different about the Enneagram is it actually sort of shows us our essence, our soul's created purpose for being, right? So when I say you're born your type, I'm being lazy. I don't think you're born your type. I think you're born to bring a gift into the world, because I believe our soul's our purpose to help heal the world. The problem is, in all of our imperfect early holding environments between the ages of 18 months or 3 years old, when we start to learn how to pretend, how to tell lies, how to mimic our environments, something sets in, and I call this the kid life crisis. Now, in the Enneagram language, they're going to call that your childhood wound, and I don't think it's a real wound. I think it's the loss of contact with essence. It's the loss of innocence. And when you lose contact with that innocence, that essence, yes, your soul aches, and the inevitability of this aching is personality structure, or in the system, type structure. And what happens here is type structure really becomes sort of the framework of your egoic self, the contours of your ego. And what it shows you, it's like the imprint of what was lost. It's the impression of what's missing and what we've forgotten. So I think the Enneagram is different because it's a tool of remembering who we were and trying to realign with the best of that.
I think that's what drew me to it in the first place. Was actually Richard was way more, you had much more experience with the Enneagram than I did before I was approached with it. But I like that depth to it.
I found that, like, I took the Myers-Briggs test and I was like, cool, yeah, some stats. And I took like other like leadership tests and things like that. And I felt like for me, the Enneagram was the first personality identifier that felt like it was talking to who I was, not just the way that I presented. And like it weirdly made me immediately so comfortable talking about like very deep insecurity of mine, which was a very powerful self-reflection tool because it felt like it put it outside of myself and made it a lot less scary. So I thought that was really cool.
Do you feel like that was because it kind of gave you an in-group of sorts? It's like, okay, well, here's this type, and there are lots of other people like you, so you're not alone. This isn't like your specific weakness or like place to falter or hurt, but like you're with other people as well. Was that something for you?
Maybe. I haven't thought about that, but that's possible.
Little deep dive on Richard.
Yeah, that's interesting. So just diving back into the structure of the Enneagram for the people listening that aren't familiar with it, it's 9 different types. The personality Enneagram is 9 different types, split into 3 different triads, or thinking. What is the terminology? I'm blanking on it.
Well, so within the Enneagram, yes, you're right. There's 9 energy points on the outside, as it's depicted on the outside of a circle, equidistant apart from each other. And these represent really the metaphor of what our stories have become, or what we think our stories have told us about ourselves and our becoming human. The Enneagram, though, is kind of like a fractal of triads, though. It keeps breaking up into sets of 3. And you see this pattern over and over and over again. So the first and really the most important one is what you're getting at, the centers of intelligence, how our conscious perceives and processes reality. And we do that either through our body or our instincts, our intuitions, through our heart or our emotions or our feelings, or through our head, which is our thoughts and our cognitive abilities.
And I do want to quickly say that I just introduced you as an expert on the Enneagram, but I truly do mean this. Chris is an expert on the Enneagram. He's written 1 book with another one soon to come, right? Mm-hmm. The first one was a bestseller, The Sacred Enneagram, Finding Your Unique Path to Spiritual Growth. And the new book coming out soon is The Enneagram of Belonging, A Compassionate Journey of Self-Acceptance. Am I getting those right?
Mm-hmm. Yep,
yeah.
Yep.
That's great. And the next one I was looking up, it's supposed to release in about a week, right?
A week from today.
That's pretty crazy. Good for you. Congrats.
It's a bummer with all the kind of launch events canceled, and
but
how this
more people are at home to read or listen to the book. So
Brene Brown did the forward and actually got her to read the forward for the audio edition. So
awesome.
Just get the audio to hear her, because she's fabulous.
Yeah. I bet. I'll have to check that out. That's great.
My wife has been nose deep in the Sacred Enneagram since she heard that you were coming on our show.
It took her about 10 minutes to download it. Like, she was just on it all.
She heard it, and 10 minutes later she was like, I bought it, and was reading through it and highlighting things she wanted me to know before I came on. So I wanted to ask you about going back to this childhood, the kid life crisis that you called it. And you're saying that is when we kind of adopt a specific type or a predominant type?
Well, I think that's when the evidence of type starts to become sort of apparent. Now, I'm not saying that if you have children, you're going to be able to type them when they're 18 months, 3 years old. I don't even think you'll probably accurately be able to type anyone but yourself,
Right.
Regardless of age. But what happens is, and I kind of think in, let's say, how do I say this? Like, I think there's so much going on in our own sort of psycho-spiritual development that I think this gift, let's say that our soul is purposed to bring into the world, when we lose contact with that, the rails for our consciousness, our let's say pre-conscious personality are already set in place, and we just sort of get in line. We get in our track. We get in our lane, and we begin to live out of that. And we begin to live out of that, I think, sort of through the push and the pull of fear and desire. And in the Enneagram, they say this. They say there's a basic desire, and they say there's a basic fear. Well, you see this show up in religion, right? It seems like Western religion is, and sorry, I don't want to be reductionistic here, but Western religion is pretty fear-based. There's a threat of eternal torment. There's the in and the out. There's people who are and aren't saved. And all of that touches on things that are deeply important to our sense of self. I would say that, and I don't want to be reductionistic, but that Eastern religions focus a little bit more on desire. Desire is the source of suffering. Desire is the source of our pain. And I think somewhere between our fear and desire, we live out of this pre-conscious personality based on these sort of the sequencing, the stacking of these three centers of intelligence in a way that's not predictable, because we're way more complex and complicated and dynamic than simply sort of a set of quirks and caricatures, but in a way that sort of gives us hints and clues to remember what was lost, to return to that essence, that truest, most authentic version of ourselves.
So I recently stumbled across the soul child theory in the Enneagram, and I was got kind of caught up in this idea of where does our specific type in the Enneagram come from? And the soul child theory,
you mean?
Yeah, like how do we end up that type? What are we born that type, or it basically nature versus nurture kind of thing? You know, is it innate in us, in our soul? Did the divine create us with the uses and desires familiar to one type, or is it sort of like trauma in our youth drives us toward something? And that's sort of the soul child theory, is that integration or the type you're supposed to integrate to is the type that you were as a child before trauma told you that wasn't right. Where do you fall on this theory?
So there's a lot to sort of untangle out of that. And so the soul child was actually an idea proposed by Hamid Ali, who writes under A.H. Almas. He was the founder of the Ridwan school, the diamond approach, which is really, this is kind of nerdy, sorry, but it's like he works with your holy idea to sort of unfixate conditioned personality. Now, what Hamid and Sandra Maitri and some of the others from the Ridwan school, the diamond approach, would say is that the soul child was the part of your ego structure that you didn't feel like you had permission to explore as a child. And so it was neglected, it was lost, it was sidelined somehow. And as an adult, what you really need to do is to actually embrace the whole of it and act out in all the good or the bad of that. My teacher, Father Richard Rohr, took this idea of the soul child and recast it a little bit, and essentially said, maybe the soul child is more the type that you are, let's say, born as. So if I'm an 8, Father Richard's going to suggest that my soul child was 2, that I was born a 2, that my so-called childhood wound threw me across the circle to point 8, and now I spend the rest of my life trying to reach or to become or to relive into my 2-ness. And I think both of those takes on that theory are fine. I mean, basically, I'm an Ennea universalist. If something works for somebody, great, work with it. But the soul child theory, as proposed by Father Richard, does sort of use this integration, disintegration languaging. And I'm not completely on board with that. Like I understand that the integration disintegration is kind of the underhanded pitch. It's the training wheels. It's the pacifier. That's what we all learn at the very beginning to understand these crisscrossing lines inside the circle. But I think what we have to do is flip those and look at them a little differently. So, sorry, I think there is something of a soul child in all of us. If it's the type we were born, if it was the essence that was lost, or if it's the unmetabolized version of our psychospiritual sort of egoic sense of self, whatever it is, we have to make peace for that. Whatever it is, we have to hold that with compassion. Whatever it is, we have to allow that inner child, that soul child to feel safe to come out into the world today. And I think that's one of the clues. That's one of the hints. That's one of the ways to kind of remember.
And that's also a healing tool. And I know it's a therapy tool that people have used of going back to your childhood when you've encountered a traumatic experience or had something really bad happen to you, of going back and figuring out what happened and kind of communicating to the child inside of you to heal whatever happened there and fix it. Because I think we all have the inner children in us try to protect us in different ways from being hurt in ways that we've learned that we can be hurt, and to go back and have that conversation. And I'm not as deep into the soul child theory as others, but it's cool to see the crossover in healing and how this does help. And again, I think that's something I really liked about the Enneagram is it focuses on how you can heal the wounds that you have. And it just feels a lot more nurturing in ways that, finding out your stats from a Myers-Briggs doesn't really access as much.
Yeah. The other personality inventories that I've done don't really have like a call to action or a direction. It's just sort of like, this is how we analyzed you. And you're like, cool, awesome. Like, I don't really know what to do with that.
Yeah. It describes, most of these profiles out there describe fragments of self. And the problem is we all do this to ourselves. We generally allow for a fragment to lay claim to the whole of who we think we are. And that's unhelpful. That's how we stay stuck. And so I do think that's one of the things that's unique about the Enneagram is it kind of shows you the whole map. Like, here's why you're here. Here's where you got lost. Here's how you stay stuck. And if you want to find your way home,
you up.
Let's get back there.
So in your book, Sacred Enneagram, you define the Enneagram as something like a person's path back to the divine, right? A person's path back to God. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah. So one of my teachers, Russ Hudson, will sometimes say that the Enneagram is less about 9 types of people and more about 9 paths to love or 9 paths to God. And I think there's something in that. I think the Enneagram shows us the 9 ways that we want to be loved and the 9 ways we go about getting love. And the bummer is it's usually more obvious to everyone else than it is to ourselves. But you also see how the Enneagram shows us the 9 ways that we want to play God or be God in the world. So if we can be truth tellers with ourselves, then certainly we start to dismantle these illusions, these lies, and that's devastating to the ego. That's humiliating to the construction of who we've tried to be. My sense is if we can allow this to really be a compassionate sketch of possibilities for who we can become when we say yes to ourselves, then there's nothing more divine or loving than that. And that's where I think there's some really important work that needs to be done right now. 20 years ago, 30 years ago, people knew their Enneagram type because you're kind of shamed into it by the shape of your tragic flaw or your sin tendency. And it was like, oh man, the old days we used to say, you're going to know your type when you're reading thick descriptions of all 9 and one stings or hurts the most. And yeah, that's true. Most of us know the harmful patterns that we seem unable to shake or correct. But what would it look like if we could approach this from compassion? Like, what would it look like if we actually slipped into this because of self-acceptance and love? And I think that's where aligning your type with mindfulness, meditation, or contemplative practices kind of changes that. And I like I said, I think that's some important work that really needs to be done out there, especially in this professional community.
Also, maybe different types need to hear different things. Like maybe one type needs to hear here's how you're going to trip up. Watch out for these. You're kind of being an ass. And they're like, oh, yeah, you're right. Dang it. And other ones need to be more lifted up. I know that for myself, I didn't really feel heard or really attracted to one type until I read The Social Three. And I was like, whoa, this has put words to how I operate in ways that no one else really has. And that was a really cool moment for me because some of the other three stuff didn't hit as hard for me. But that one really got to the core of how I operate and how I feel very blessed to be able to operate as a person and as a social person. That was a cool moment for me.
Yeah. I really like the Enneagram because part of it is I see a lot of crossover between the Enneagram structure and the faith that I practice, and this idea of basically the whole point of our life on earth is to find a reconnection with God, right? The whole reason we're here is to find a conjunction with the divine, and in doing so, be more effective to the world. And I really liked reading your description of the Enneagram as a path back to God. I thought that was a cool way of framing it. And on the note of a connection between my faith practice and your description of the Enneagram, I want to nerd out for a second and talk to you about the numbers in the Enneagram, because I glanced over your section in the Sacred Enneagram about the numbers and their significance and the recurring patterns. And specific numbers have a lot of significance in our faith, particularly the number 3. And you go big
not a big
into
deal, not a big deal. Threes are pretty cool. I get it.
And you go big into the number 3 and the recurring patterns of 3. So what is the significance of specific numbers to the Enneagram, and the number 3 in particular?
That's a good question.
Sure. So what you see when you look at a drawing or a rendering of the Enneagram as a diagram, you're looking at 3 symbols, and each of these symbols contain a teaching within them. So the first, of course, is a circle, and this is a symbol of the law of one, of union, of embrace, of inclusion, of the eternal or the divine. It's really a sign and a symbol of wholeness, right? You look inside that circle and you see 2 more symbols. You see an irregular hexadad or 6-pointed star, and this speaks to the law of 7. And in the old days, I used to fight my teachers. I'm like, there's no 7 in this. It's 6 points. It's 6 numbers. But you see, when you take any whole number.
That was my first thought too. When you just
right.
I'm like, wait a second. No,
yeah, it's just like I wanted to fight these guys. It's like you're making this up. But when you take any whole number and you divide it into 7, what you get on the inside of the decimal point is a repeating pattern of those 6 numbers in their defensive stance, right? So 2 divided by 7 is 0.2857 in an infinite repeating pattern. And what you're seeing with the kind of sacred geometry here is all of these things point to the building of a number, 7. That's a symbol in most religious texts of perfection, of completion, of wholeness. And that's how we experience life. We experience it through patterns and impressions of 7, right? So we tell time through the 7 days of the week. We see color refracted through the 7 hues of a prism. We hear music through the 7 fundamental tones in an octave. We experience our body through these 7 energy points or chakras. But the other symbol and the third symbol that you see inside the circle is the triangle, and this speaks to the law of 3. And 3 is, in so many faith traditions, one of the ways that we experience the understanding of the divine. And so in historic Christian communities, this is sometimes seen as the Trinity or Trinitarian notions of that. But what you see in the Enneagram with this law of 3 is there's a push-pull, there's an active and a passive, there's a reconciling and a resisting energy. And you know this, that when you draw a line, it will extend infinitely in both directions. And so you have to segment lines with a beginning and an end. And this is what happens in our human condition. We are segmented. And so there's good people and bad people. There's people who are in our communities and out our communities. There's people who are right and there's people who are wrong.
Are you saying that's how things are or how we see them?
that's how we see them, and that's how we live, and that creates a lot of our pain and the pain in the world. So what the law of three does, right? It takes a segmented line, this polarized world that we live in fact, the perfection of our own inner polarized lives that we project into the world. And it says, no, there's a third way. There's always a third way of seeing all of these things. You're not all good and you're not all bad. You're not right and you're not wrong. And it allows for us to be and others to be. And so you see this law of one, law of three, law of seven inside this drawing, and they're all different lessons. They're all different teachings.
I like that. I really liked that triangle analogy at the end there. It reminded me of something in our faith practice that talks about in a marriage that when two people come together in a marriage, it's really a promise they're making to God as well as to each other. And there's this idea of a triangle, and the bottom two sides of the triangle are the two people coming together, and at the top of the triangle is God. And as they both in their spiritual practice move toward God, inevitably they're moving closer toward each other as well. And that's sort of a framework for the practice of marriage that a lot of people in our faith use. And that just your description of that third point reminded me of that.
Maybe this is a novice question, but I didn't see it addressed much of anywhere in my research, but I'm assuming people have to look at Enneagram types and think about them from a romantic standpoint of like, okay, I'm a type 3, should I be looking for a type blah, 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 or whatever. Is that ever addressed and talked about? Maybe this is just a blind spot of my own, but I'm curious.
There's quite a bit of work out there on the Enneagram and relationships. And I do a little bit of work in some of my workshops on, your fundamental relational needs based on type, or your conflict avoidance styles, or your conflict resolution styles.
That's really important.
My sense is I don't sort of look at the Enneagram as sort of a chart for matchmaking. I think there's going to be gifts and challenges in the pairing of any two numbers. I would say the conventional and traditional wisdom would generally say this, however, it's two people of the same type that will sometimes have a harder time in intimate relationships. And I can see that on one hand. However, I also see that two people of the same type end up often making really good friends and have really strong
one of my best buddies is the same type as me.
Yeah. So that's typical. I would say this, though, you referenced earlier that you're a social 3. And if folks are listening and don't know what that means, it doesn't
they can
mean that
do their own research.
You're extroverted. It just means that your dominant driving sort of biological survival skill, the residue of evolution left over in your DNA, is a social instinct, which is about power dynamics. It's about belonging to group. It's about betterment and making community or your relationship stronger. Well, this is one of 3 instincts, right? There's the self-preservation instinct, the sexual instinct, and the social instinct. And so there's a self-pres 3, a sexual 3, and a social 3. Right. And this is where you get 27 subtypes. And then when you sequence those instincts, so I'm a social, sexual, self-pres 8, this is where you get 54 instinctual variants. And if you throw a wing on either side of those, this is how you get 108 types.
Yeah, you're exploding.
Well, anyway, we don't have to talk about 108 types. We don't have to talk about 54.
Let's go through 5 minutes each.
But I would say this, if you know what your most neglected instinct is, right? Mine's self-preservation. My wife's is actually social. And then if you see how your most neglected instinct and your partner's dominant instinct are mismatched, I would say that's where you may have some of the more challenges in relationships. So I'm a social 8. Felina's a self-pres 2. Self-pres is my backseat instinct. Social is hers. And that's where most of our conflict arises.
Interesting. I'll have to look that up. My girlfriend's a 6. I don't know what her specific integration and wing and all that stuff is, but that's really cool. And we've done a good job at communicating through a bunch of hard stuff. But I'll definitely have to look that up more deeply. On a similar note, I was really interested thinking about these types, and obviously how we connect socially, but also how they connect spiritually. So I'm wondering, and maybe you touched on this a little bit in your book, but how the different types connect to God uniquely. Like, I don't know if you want to pick out one in specific to talk about, but I know for myself how I connect to God, just as a person, not necessarily as a 3, but how I feel the presence of God and feel connected and empowered is much different than how other people do.
Should we, quick before this question, have a
do we wanna
guest?
do- yeah, sure.
So we are trying to, with our new technological capabilities, have people who
I guess I'm
watch
like
our
we're
show.
aliens.
our
We got
new
some alien
technological
tech that allows us
capabilities,
to.
have people come on and either ask us a question or ask a guest a question. And one of our avid watchers, and also my mother-in-law, who is big into the Enneagram, was wondering if she could come on and ask you a question. How do you feel about that?
Feel free to say no because this is
for sure.
edited.
Yeah.
Yeah, Ben, you wanna
come on.
hook that up?
Yeah, hold on. So this is just going to take one little tech second to make sure. Oh, and there she is.
All right.
Hello. Hi.
Hello.
Hi, Richard, Luke, and Chris. Nice to meet you. Hi. I've been reading your book, The Sacred Enneagram, and it's really been feeding me. It's just what I needed to read right now. And one thing that I noticed early on in the book is one thing that struck me is the way you talked about the 3 intelligence centers and being the way that God speaks to us. I'm really interested in hearing more about that, and particularly because I am dominant in type 9, and being raised in a faith tradition that's really head center. It's I'm curious to learn more about how I can access my body center in terms of connecting with God.
That's a good question.
Yeah, that's great. So poor 9s are maybe the most disconnected from their bodies or their body intelligence. There's a kind of, for the 9, they're born to be a source of love. And this is why 9 sits at the top of the circle, as if sort of the rising sun or the full moon, like you're radiating that love, and all the other types just sort of kind of fall off the sides of the 9 at 8 and 1, really intense, and at 4 and 5, really withdrawn, kind of diminished versions of the 9. But you see, even in that, there's something of the 9 that's lost. There's some of the energy of the 9 that leaks, that flows down both sides of the circle. And so for the 9, there's a kind of call to reconnecting with your body, and learning to actually trust that, learning to actually trust your instincts, your intuition. But you see, for the body types, this most accessible emotion is a form of frustration or anger. And for the 9s, it can sometimes feel like frustration or anger isn't loving. And so that's also neglected. That's also suppressed within the 9. And so it doesn't make sense for a lot of folks when I say this, but I think for a lot of 9s, it resonates. Actually learning to access your anger is where you're going to actually learn to hear some of the truest things about yourself that you've turned down or you've not listened to. And I would in fact say that there would be love and experiences of God in that anger, when that anger can be exposed for what it is. And we know this anger is typically disguised sadness. And I think for the sadness of the 9, it's coming to terms with what was lost, what was forfeited, what was neglected. This is where I say that the so-called childhood wound or the kid life crisis of the 9 was minimizing what was important to you so that you could make what was important to somebody else in your early holding environment central. And you thought that was loving, but in that process, you gave so much of yourself away. So much of yourself was lost. So much of yourself was hidden, that there's sadness there. And so when you start to practice your anger, great, you're getting closer to the truth. But when you interrogate that anger and find the sadness, I think what you're going to find is there was ways that I didn't love myself because I thought being self-sacrificial was loving. And I think that's where you're going to really connect with God.
Right. I feel that that's something that I'm working on now, and learning to access anger is scary, and it feels a little bit difficult, and also feel like I'm worried that I'm going to do it wrong,
Yeah. Yeah, you'll do it wrong because for a lot of nines, they've not practiced it, and then nines will feel really bad because they don't want to inconvenience their those that in their home, their community, their workplaces. But for folks in relationships with nines, it's also just giving them the freedom to be clumsy with it, to figure it out, like to learn to express it, and that's fine. Like, it's the grace that we have to give each other.
So I guess when I was thinking about this question, I was thinking about the way that we approach God and the way that we listen for God. And I guess I'm going to discover that by getting into the anger. It feels counterintuitive to me.
Yeah, it's super hard for nines. Like, I mean, it's like, and like I said, let me make sure that, like, I'm not just saying go become a pissed, angry person now, and that's you being spiritual. No, it's making room for something that's been neglected or suppressed or hidden, and then it's allowing that into the room, let's say, so it can reintroduce itself to you. And that's, I think, that second step of realizing that your anger is really disguised sadness. And then it's understanding what's the source of that sadness. And it's not the things that make you sad today. It really is the neglecting of the tenderest parts of yourself at a point in your life where you actually thought making yourself important was selfish, and there could be no love in that. Well, we know this. We can only take people as far as we've gone ourselves in any area, and we can only love people insofar as we've learned to love ourselves in any area. And so it's just learning to love ourselves in 9 different ways.
It sounds like a constructive anger versus a deconstructive anger. And I think we're quick to look at anger as deconstructive or breaking things and burning things, but it sounds constructive.
It has to be, and it has to be honest. But we're going to be bad at it. We're going to be clumsy. Like, we're going to get it wrong. That's okay. That's how we get things right, by practice.
It's not the same for all the 3 body types, though. Like,
right. Because 8s are expressing their anger constantly, and there's generally not a whole lot of truth in that. And then 1s are trying to manage that anger. They're trying to keep it held back. And this is why a lot of 1s, you see this with 1s, they grind their teeth in their sleep, or there's a lot of tension somatically stored in their jaws. It's like, I'm biting my tongue. I'm not letting the anger out. And it's kind of the somatic give of that inner need to control it. So yeah, we experience it in 9 different ways, actually.
Yeah. Thank you for that.
Yeah. Sure. And thank you so much for coming on to ask your question.
Yeah. Annika, thanks for popping in. We appreciate it.
You're welcome. It was nice to see you. Good to meet you, Chris.
Yes. Behave.
She goes and hulks out after this. Holes all throughout her house, punching walls.
All right. See you later.
See ya.
But yeah, I like that point of it's not like an instructive on how to pray or anything, but it's more finding what's been neglected in you and healing that as a way to connect to the divine. I like that framework.
Yeah, it's just like I said, it's remembering what's been lost, right? Because we've always known, we know this. We're already resourced. We have everything we need. It's just reconnecting with it.
Yeah. Selfishly, I'd love to go back and hear what you were going to say about my girlfriend being a 6 and me being a.
Can I say a comment?
Ignore me. I'm going to fix the set.
Oh, our set broke.
Our set, no. Just this idea of you mentioned kind of in passing there of we can only love others so much as we've learned to love ourselves. And our faith has this cool idea of kind of a hierarchy of loves. And at the bottom is love to yourself. And I think people can interpret that as like, it's the least important. We shouldn't be there. We should move up to love of the neighbor or love of God. But I think more accurately, it's a foundation. And you need to build up to love of God. And you can't do that without a healthy foundation. You know, a house built on the sand will fall. And so I liked that idea of, you know, you need to be comfortable with who you are before you can really have a healthy relationship with someone else or with God or the divine or the Lord. So I just
for sure. In my, you know, early religious conditioning or socialization or formation, there was that sort of joy is Jesus, others, and yourself in that order. And this is sort of the prioritizing of attention or affection. And I think there's actually no joy in that if you can't love yourself. You actually can't even receive the love of the divine if you've not practiced self-love. So it isn't selfish. And I think you're right. I think it is foundational. I think it's the groundwork for actually learning to be able to give and receive love. But see, religion sometimes gets things like this wrong, and this is where religion can sometimes end up hurting us more than helping us. This is where you see so many religious people who don't love themselves. In fact, they hate themselves. They can't even see anything very good about who they are. They have to image themselves as fatally flawed or inherently corrupt or mortally unredeemable outside of their own efforts to experience and to accept that love. And this can lead to lots and lots and lots of pain. That's unnecessary.
I can fall into a trap sort of like that, where I think I have value and worth, but I have a very checklist-oriented mind where I'm quick to focus on the negative things just to make them into good things. And then once something's been made well or is good or I finished it, boom, I check it off the list. I don't think about it anymore because what's the point in reflecting on the good things that have happened because they're done, they're completed. Let's move on to the next thing. And I consider myself very happy and like pretty fulfilled and valuable. But I do find myself slipping into that trap. And I want to take more space to reflect on the good things that have happened and be able to pat myself on the back a little bit more than I do. I think it's a good piece of progress for me, at least.
Yeah, and I think there's sort of this push and pull with me because on the one hand, and the way I understand my faith practice is this idea that without God, I am nothing. I am worthless. And I think that comes across as harsh, but when you step back and look at it, of course, I mean, if God is the essence of love, the essence of wholeness, the essence of creation, of course, completely separated from that, there isn't anything else. But the caveat is that there is no situation in which we are ever separated from that. You know, there is no complete separation from God because that is non-existence. And so the practice, the spiritual practice, is recognizing who God created us to be, the goodness that the divine gave us to bring into the world, and feeding that. And I think there is a humility in recognizing that is a gift we've been given to use, not something that we did, kind of.
The humility aspect.
Yeah,
of it.
yeah.
I've heard, of course, as we all have, versions of self-imaging along those lines that, like, apart from the love of God, I am nothing, I am worthless, or that string of assumptions that we can sort of like pull the thread on the sweater and unravel the entire garment. The thing is, I've never held a newborn and looked at the miracle of that life and said, this is worthless. And
I don't think many have.
Right. But we say it about ourselves and we believe it about ourselves. And this is one of the ways that religion, I think, has caused so much harm. It's like, of course, that baby is perfect and beautiful and does not deserve anything other than all of the love it can handle. It does not deserve any sort of punishment or any sort of criticism. It is because it is, and it's an invitation to love. And I actually think that may be a better way to understand our own human condition, our own sense of self, that we are an invitation to love because we're an invitation to receive and give love. And if you lead with that worthless sort of self-imaging, though, man, there's no way out of it. Like there's no end to that.
Yeah. And I get how that idea of, so the way I take it is like, because there is no way that God would ever be not with me, there is no way I could be apart from the divine. There is therefore no way I could ever be worthless. There is no way I could even achieve that on this earth. And that's a really beautiful thing for me, and has helped me through a lot of dark times in my life. This idea of like, if I'm still living and breathing, then there is at least the smallest speck of the divine still with me, and therefore there's a reason I'm still living and breathing, and I'm not worthless. And I think it reframed, it can become something so beautiful, and it's so sad to see the ways that it has been so destructive for people.
For sure. It's all about love.
Richard, I was going to say that is particularly valuable as your type, but I didn't want to give any spoilers if you wanted to make Chris guess what your type is based on everything.
Oh yeah, so
but I don't want him to if he doesn't want to.
Wait, before we do that, should we get to the cliffhanger about?
Oh, sure, yeah. Revisiting what we were gonna say before the guest. Yeah, selfishly, I'd love to know what you were gonna say about.
Oh yeah,
he was gonna say you guys should break up now. There's no way this is gonna work. I could see it in his eyes.
Yeah. So when you said your partner's a 6, I was just gonna say like you also see this in relationships. One of the many triads that comes out of the Enneagram is something that's sometimes called the harmony triads. That was what the late Dr. David Daniels called them, or what the Enneagram Institute has called the dominant affect groups based on object relations theory. What you see is they become sort of clusters of how energies sort of flow. And so 3, 6, and 9, those 3 types are sometimes called the pragmatists or the attachment types. And they stick with what works. They're sensible. They get things done, like, and they work really, really, really well together. And so there's a kind of natural affinity there when you see a 3 or 6 or 9 in relationship, because they're kind of picking up on each other's sort of unspokens, and they kind of get the accent that the other is speaking with. So that's there's good flow there.
Nice, thank you. I'm glad to hear that. Put that in my back pocket. Cha-ching. No, that's great. Yeah, and that's really nice to hear.
So in the time we have left here, I do want to
get to his books and give a plug for the books, but keep going.
You talk about being an Enneagram coach, as we've mentioned before, and I was just reflecting. I've never actually seen Enneagram coaching happen, and I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about what it means to be an Enneagram coach, or if it would make sense to walk through like a little example of Enneagram coaching. Is there a system that you walk through that we could do right now, or does it not really work that way?
So I imagine it would be difficult to kind of condense that into a quick conversation, because I usually spend about an hour with folks trying to understand who they perceive themselves to be, where they feel stuck. Some of the conversations have specifically to do with, let's say, the ladder of how we light ourselves, 9 different ways about our basic fear. Some of these have to do with vocation or relationships. Some of these are helping folks find clarity on type. Through our little nonprofit, we have kind of a hit list of specialists. There's 4 or 5 of us that actually do one-on-one work, and we all come at it from different approaches with different focus. So I think this is a great resource out there for people. I wouldn't replace a spiritual director or a therapist with an Enneagram coach. I think it's a completely different kind of support, but it's one of many supports that some people have found really helpful.
Yeah, definitely worth looking into for people.
Yeah, I think it's great. It just sort of helps us, because here's the thing. The truth is most of us don't know that we don't know who we are. And sometimes it takes
some of us don't want to know.
Oh, for sure. We don't want to know. We prefer not to know, actually.
Yeah.
But it sometimes takes another set of eyes to just sort of mirror back to us what's obvious, but maybe hidden away in our shadows.
Yeah. Yeah, that's something I kind of, in a weird, almost masochistic way, I love critiques for myself. Like, I want people to like tell me what I'm doing wrong, that I can, being fed things to improve is just fire to my burning, so yeah, I don't know. Anyway.
And that's so it's such an ache for the three who is kind of on this self-perfection plan. Because it points back to simply this, that you're not the most successful. You're not the most ambitious. Like, one of the names for the three is the achiever. It's not that you're achievement driven. And in fact, for a lot of threes, it's never been truthfully about failure or success. It's always been about love. And as little kids, threes have the hollowest of the heart centers. It needs to be filled with something. And of course, what that is love. But as children, you learn very quickly that reward, attention, affection, admiration is a quick fix. It's easier for you somehow. Mm-hmm. And in the patterning of that, it becomes the muscle memory of a trade-off. And as adults, this is why a lot of threes stay lonely, even in intimate relationships, because you've swapped out affirmation for love, attention for love. But like I said earlier, the problem is if till you can learn to love yourself, you'll never be able to receive the love of another.
Yeah.
And so this self-perfection path for the three is often, I'm going to have to make myself lovable by making myself valuable.
Yeah.
Or I will ascribe value to everything I do or everyone in my life as a way of mirroring back my desire to earn value. And you can't earn intrinsic value. It's always been ascribed. And so this is the ache. This is the ache for all of us in 9 different ways.
Yeah. The intrinsic value has always been a tough thing for me. I think I always framed it as I have very high expectations of myself and I know what I can accomplish. Like, I know what's feasible. So doing anything short of that is me not meeting my own expectations or not fulfilling the life that I have one chance to live. So like, yeah, in school, I'm going to get straight A's. I'm going to do all the things. I'm going to have a perfect report card because I know I can. And post-school, figuring out what that looks like and making these markers for myself to achieve because I know what I'm capable of. And doing so in a maybe a very three way is showing the possibilities of being human and fulfilling this drive and determination in a very like satisfying way. And sometimes that can go a little bit too far. And I need to bring it back to realize the inherent value rather than just proving that I can do things and so I have value. And that's it's a lifelong sort of journey for me, definitely.
Yeah, and for all of us, like we're all doing the same version of the same thing.
Right.
Not to be cliche, but in 9 different ways.
Yeah. So as we start to wrap up here, first of all, thank you so much for jumping on with us. We really appreciate you taking the time out of your busy, chaotic life to come and spend some time chatting with us. That's really nice.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So I wanted to let you plug your books, and I'd love to know a little bit about the difference of the book that's coming out now. So your first book again was The Sacred Enneagram, which is finding your unique path to spiritual growth. And the new one coming out in a week is The Enneagram of Belonging, a compassionate journey of self-acceptance. So what would you say is the big difference between these books?
Sure. So the Sacred Enneagram is, I would say, is kind of my introduction to the tradition. I know we kind of start in the deep end in that book. So it's not like training wheels. But the Sacred Enneagram essentially says this: if you know your type, now what? How do you work with your type? Through mindfulness, meditation, and contemplative practice to loosen what's fixated and conditioned. within us, what keeps us stuck. I think the Enneagram of belonging, the punchline is really this: if there's any aspect of myself that I do not allow to belong, then the truth is no aspect can fully belong. And this goes both ways. The parts of myself that I dislike, the parts of myself that I think are bad or negative, have to belong. And the parts of myself that are beautiful and amazing and fabulous also have to belong. And you know this, if you work with religious folks, there's a lot of people who've been socialized in religious communities, like I said, who don't think there's fabulous, amazing, perfect, and beautiful things about them. And so in both directions, we have to learn to make peace with it all. The Enneagram of belonging, though, kind of does that by throwing back to the 4 original Enneagrams that Claudio Naranjo, a Gestalt Chilean psychoanalyst, used to develop the personality system. And, you know, the bummer is in 2020, I kind of joke around, like, since we've been talking, there's probably 9 new Enneagram Instagram meme accounts that have started. A lot of these
Probably
sort of
true.
overnight instant experts don't know what these 4 basic building blocks are. They don't know how to work with the holy ideas, the virtues, the passions, and fixations. So the Enneagram of belonging is kind of a throwback. Hey, what is it? What are the fundamental aspects? Can we re-language these? Can we make these practical? Can we learn to work with them for our own sort of wholeness? And then it's a pushing forward, and it's saying, where does this tradition take us? It's still young. It's just 50 years old. What haven't we uncovered here, and where does this go? And I'm hopefully kind of pointing to this is where it can go, but it can only go as far as we go inward with it. And so let's get to work here.
Thanks. You mentioned, and after everything you said, I feel like a jerk bringing this up, but
Great way to start a sentence. I'm excited
you
where it's
mentioned
gonna go.
Enneagram meme accounts, and I was just thinking the other day about, I found a bunch of them that were just the most derivative nonsense.
Oh, we should have just had like a true or false meme contest. That would have been great.
It was like, one was like the 9 different Enneagram types as cocktails. And it was just like, what? What is this? 2s were avocado margaritas.
Oh, that's what Richard is, by the way. Richard is a 2.
I'm a 2. First of all, what is an avocado margarita?
They're delicious. Ben and I had them before. They're very
they're a
tasty.
bomb. We did
High
an
recommendation.
episode on the road, and it was a great time getting avocado margaritas.
Anyway, Chris, thank you so much for taking the time to come on with us. We wish you the best in all your endeavors, and I hope this book is another bestseller for you.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thanks for making time.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Have a good one.
All right, you guys behave.
We will.
Well, you too. Thanks for tuning into this week's episode of Spiritable. If you're listening to just the audio right now, you can check out the video on YouTube at Spiritable Podcast. If you have any questions, you can comment below on our YouTube video or send us an email.
Seriously, though, please do comment and like, because it makes
I
our
was
job a lot
right in
better.
the middle of my monologue, Luke.
No, it was a good vibe.
No, yeah, I was
I feel
playing
like
off
you
of
were-
it. Yeah.
Oh, well, it didn't sound like you were playing.
Luke,
That was the only take. I heard only
Yep,
take. a
I'm
second ago.
continuing.
I'm just gonna say that.
or send us an email at spiritablepodcast@gmail.com with any questions you have, or if you want to be on the show like Annika just was. If you have any questions you want to ask us live in person, check it out. If you like what we're doing and want other people to see it as well, feel free to subscribe or hit us with a like. It's the only way other people will see what we're doing. So thanks so much for tuning in.
Should we try another one?
No, that's it. I like it.
I'm in it. It's
So
good.
long. It was so long.
I'll cut it
Let's
short
sync it
on
up. Let's try to do it as fast as we can.
No, I like it. I like it.
All right.
It felt real.
No one watches the ending anyway. Do you watch this? You don't watch this.
Yeah, you don't watch this ending.